Welcome to I Found This Great Book. My name is Curtis, and today we're going to talk about the fourth book by Jessie Redmon Fauset, Comedy, American Style. And I've had the pleasure of speaking with some really great friends of mine who are readers and podcasters and booktubers and all that good stuff. But today I'm really excited because I get to discuss this book with one who has created a phenomenal podcast, who's a writer and a reader, someone who knows books. And that is the great Tonia Ransom. How you doing, Tonia?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Curtis. How are you?
I am fantastic. I am really excited to dig into this book. There's a lot going on in this book.
Yeah.
I got a lot of feelings. Jessie Redmon Fauset, you walk away from her books with a lot of feelings, you know. You gotta.
This is the first one of hers that I've read, actually.
Yeah, I came across her. It was purely by accident. I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about. It was a podcast where the person was talking about a book they wrote about the topic of passing and how that has been in Black literature through all this time. And she was talking about that. Of course, they talk about Nella Larson, but she was talking about there are other sources, other people who wrote like that. And then she said what she was working on is a book about Jessie Redmon Fauset, who had really not gotten the same attention that other people in the Harlem Renaissance had received, but how she had played such a pivotal role as being editor of Crisis magazine and written poetry. And she had 4 novels, and I went, what? So I went and immediately looked, and I said, oh, wow, all 4 of them available. And I need to do this. This will be a good trek.
Available and for a reasonable price. Because a lot of times, these older books, if you want them, you got to pay like $300 for them.
No, because somebody have a old
that bad.
tattered paper copy, and they're like, here, no, but.
Right. And it's $300. You're missing the cover.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't know about that.
I'm not about that life.
Yeah, I can't do that. But but all of her books are available. They're available in electronic format as well as paper. So
yeah,
it's great. And hopefully by us doing this, we can bring some more attention, expose more people to her work, and get her some of the attention. So it's not just their eyes are watching God. There are other books written during the Harlem Renaissance, folks.
Yes. Yes.
There are a whole lot.
Yes.
So Tonia, you are the creator of the Nightlight Podcast, where you feature horror fiction by Black authors. And we've talked before about that, but I just want everybody to know, if you really want to hear something innovative and great, if you want to delve into horror and you don't know where to start, you should get on this podcast. And you could just start there. And just start, I'll listen to that story. Okay, well, there's an author. Let me go find some more. And and the key place to go, you just need to go to nightlightpod.com. Just go there. Tonia has everything there. You can start listening. You can find out more about her. You can find out how to follow her on social. You can find out how to support. But definitely, if you've ever been interested in horror written by Black authors and the feel we bring to it, check that site out. Also, Tonia has a book, which I've started reading it, and it's called Arisen, and it's available. So you check that out too. And you'll all I can say is, you'll get through the first chapter. Matter of fact, you'll get through the first 2 pages. You're like, oh my God. But did that just happen? I just started. Whoa.
Yeah, that's kind of my writing style, though. It's like, punch you right in the face and then say, get up, let's go.
So definitely go to nightlightpod.com and check out that great podcast.
One thing that your listeners might be interested in, I'm not great at promoting myself, but I've been told that I should be telling everyone this, that Nightlight won Best Fiction Podcast, an IGNYTE award back in September of last year.
Right. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, it was our first award. So yeah, I'm pretty stoked to have it. I
Yeah.
have it like right in front of me right now.
Look at you.
Yeah.
That is so cool. Yeah, I know that is great, and it's well deserved because you're doing something innovative, novel, and really exposing people to a genre and the people in that genre where they wouldn't know how to find it. Because just as an aside, so I have my directory of Black mystery authors, and you know, every so often I get someone who says, "Well, why do you have this? And this is wrong." And I'm thinking, okay, I've got like uh 500 some odd books in there, and last year over 1 million books were published.
Oh
So
wow.
that was last year. They said, now that's granted textbooks,
Yeah.
nonfiction, but still, that's 1 million.
That's a lot. Yeah,
I'm
that's a lot of
sure
competition out there.
I'm sure there were more than 500 mysteries published last year.
Oh yeah.
So
Most
I'm
definitely.
thinking if all I've got are 500, we would get swallowed up. And I'm sure it's the same way with horror. I mean, there's a lot
Yeah.
of fiction out there, but hey, if I'm looking for this, I can just go right over to Nightlight and I could start finding people, and you have that curated list. And that's so valuable, what you're doing. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
okay. So let's talk about something that definitely made me feel, uh, have a lot of feelings, not horror, but it definitely made me feel. Let's talk about comedy, American style. First of all, I want to talk about the title. Um, when you saw that title, what did you think?
When you emailed me and said, "Hey, do you wanna talk about this book?" And I saw the title, I was like, "Why is he asking me?" I'm like, "I'm the horror person." Like, yeah, I'm the Black horror person, and this is a Black writer, but, I looked at it and I thought, "Well, this doesn't sound very funny." And then, I realized it was an ironic title, and
Hmm.
that immediately intrigued me. But, at first glance, and I think it almost does the book a disservice. Like,
Hmm.
I think it's a great title, like, I think it's an appropriate title, but I think that a lot of people that might typically pick it up and enjoy it might be turned off
Hmm.
by the title, but I can't think of a more appropriate title either, So, like, I'm torn here because it's like it's a good book, and I think it's an important book. Like, honestly, I think it would be a great book, to read in school. Like, I would have loved to read this book,
Hmm.
in AP English or something like that. Um But yeah, I feel like it's intentionally misleading in a way, like, the the title itself is a commentary on America and racism.
Hmm.
So again, an incredibly appropriate title, but again, I feel like a lot of people who would enjoy it would just pass it over.
Right. Because people might think, oh, this is a comedy. And after you read the first few pages, you're like, there's nothing funny here.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I also thought, because from reading her other books, and I think right at that time period, they were really trained in terms of the classics. And I was wondering, and I said, well, let me
Yeah.
go look at something. And I looked up, like, what's a Greek comedy? Because they have the
Mhm.
three: comedy, tragedy, and satire. Aristotle described the genre of comedy as being different from tragedy, and in the documentation I found that Aristotle said that comedies represent men as worse than they are in real life, whereas
Ooh,
tragedy shows them being better. And
interesting.
tragedies have real people, whereas comedy uses stereotypes. And so we use the word comedy and we think, haha, yuck, yuck.
Right.
And I'm wondering if she was leaning on that too. I mean, that's not something, a
Yeah.
lot of people aren't trained in that, so they wouldn't recognize it. And maybe people of that time period, had a more classical education and they would recognize that. But
Yeah. But even still, I think it's more of a tragedy than a
yeah,
comedy, because, like,
it's
the whole
tragic.
idea of a comedy, when you're talking about, how the Greeks defined, comedy versus
Hmm.
tragedies, comedy is your main character starts off with, terrible circumstances and eventually comes out the better for it. They
Hmm.
went through something really hard, but they're victorious at the end and they've grown as a person. Whereas a tragedy is more bad things befall your main character, but they can't seem to dig their way out of it, and they don't improve
Yeah.
as a person at the end. And so I think that this fits more as a tragedy than a comedy, which is another reason that I think that, like, it's the title is intentionally to poke at what was happening in America at that time and
Hmm.
still happening today. Um, but yeah, I think that, that the whole comedy thing may be turning people off is twofold. One, because of our modern definition of it,
Hmm.
people expect jokes, and there aren't any jokes in this
No,
book, right?
there's nothing jokey.
No, nothing funny. But then also, like, the main characters in the end, aren't really better off. I mean, there are a couple that are. We can talk about that here in a little while. So, like, there are some arcs that are comedic in nature when we're talking about, Greek ideas. And then there are some characters that have a story that's more tragic
Hmm.
in nature. So it's definitely both, but I think it's more tragic than comedic if I had to, like, pick one over the other.
I agree. Yeah, especially Oliver. That really hurt me. So
Yeah.
I was expecting okay, and oh no. Uh,
Yeah.
um, so the structure of the book, it starts off with it's kind of interesting. It's kind of like a play structure, I guess, where it starts off with the plot, where kind of
Mhm.
lays the underscore of everything that this book is about, and then the characters where you meet all the people, and then they focus on three main characters, and they kind of wrap it up. And so the key thing with the plot, I guess, is the whole story is about at that time people who were passing, black people who were light skinned and their ability to pass,
Mhm.
and where it was a much more important thing then because there were so many more freedoms you had and safety you had if you weren't black
Mhm.
compared to now where it's not nearly like this. 100 years later,
Right.
this was set in the 1920s. And so we're 100 years later and the world is a very different place.
Yeah. It's amazing how similar things are today when it comes to passing. That, there are a set of people who are able to pass, and, not just black and white, also, straight
Yeah.
when, they're really LGBTQ, um, passing as, say, a, white Christian person when really they're, say, an atheist person. So,
Hmm.
there are, lots of instances of people passing. It's just skin color is obviously the hardest thing
Yeah.
to, pass with. And I think that, even today we still have, a subset of people that would choose to pass if they could, and do choose to pass if they can. And then there's another set of people that are able to pass, but they refuse to do so because they feel like it's not honoring who they are as a person. It's not authentic of them to be someone that they're not. And so people are still dealing with these same struggles, even today. And I mean, growing up, so I'm mixed. For anyone who hasn't seen any of my photos or anything online, especially when I was growing up in the 80s and the 90s,
Hmm.
and interracial relationships weren't, especially in, deep woods, East Texas, weren't, a huge thing. A lot of people, would just look at me and be like, "What are you?" Like,
Yeah.
they looked at me and I didn't look black, and so I wasn't treated like a black person a lot of times. I was treated more like a Hispanic person because that's what they assumed
Hmm.
that I was for, whatever reason, or I would get, like, Filipino or Hawaiian a lot. I don't see that. I don't know where
Yeah.
that one comes from, but yeah, but I mean, it's just I think it's my eyes. I think that's what it is. But yeah, like, for a long time, I remember being a little girl and thinking that, because my mother was white and, my dad pretty much never came to school because he was always working. And, my mom was the one,
Hmm.
just like most mothers are, the one who typically interacts with children at school and takes them to the grocery store, things like that. And, so I wasn't seen out in public with my dad a whole lot. And I remember being really little. And the first time someone asked me if I was Mexican, thinking, I could say that I'm Mexican and they wouldn't know any better. They would see my mom and they would just be like, "Oh, she's just half Mexican." Because I'd already seen how people treated black people, at this point, was definitely not a stranger to racism.
Mm-hmm.
And, I knew, even at, 9, 10 years old, like I knew the benefits of passing as anything but Black in the society. Like, yes, if I passed as Mexican, that, still wouldn't be great for me because, Mexicans and other Hispanics encounter their own racism,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still like a step up in America, at least
Mm-hmm.
from being Black. And, I seriously considered like if I just started telling everybody that I was Mexican, they would believe me because they didn't know any better.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be treated better as a result of it. But at the end of the day, because of the way my parents raised me, I couldn't make that cognitive leap into I'm gonna pretend to be something I'm not,
Right.
even if it benefits me.
And that's how the story starts. So the mother,
Olivia.
Olivia,
Mhm.
plays a pivotal role through it, even though she's not there all the time. But her
Right.
actions play a pivotal role. And early on in the story, folks, it starts off where Olivia's a child and she's at school, and her mother was very, very fair complected, and her father was brown, I say. And then so
Mhm.
she was very fair complexion. She was very light skinned, and she was at school. And well, she had one incident where they were playing and they were playing snowball, and she got a good lick on somebody, and that person turned around and called her a racial epithet and said, "Don't you dare hit me." And that's when she was like, "Whoa."
Hold
up
up.
to now, up to now, I
Right.
was just a kid playing, and
Right.
I look like you, and yet, oh, there's something bad about me and about my
Yeah.
father's skin color. And then when she was at school, suddenly the teacher thought, yeah, a little Italian girl. And another little young white girl said, yeah, she means you. Come on over here. And,
Right.
I'm Polish, you're Italian. They all kind of feel certain ways about us. And the lady was saying, well, I feel you Italians are just like us. And okay, I'll be Italian.
Right. Yeah, that's better than
Yeah. And, yeah. And so that had a fundamental effect upon her. And
yeah.
then moving forward, she really wanted to embrace being white and pass for white, kind of reject everything, even though her father was, genuinely a Black person. But then when he passed away, her mother moved and they moved to a new neighborhood. And the mother married a gentleman who was very light skinned, so they could pass if they wanted to. And she decided, I'm going to pursue this life. But she never ended up marrying a white man. She ended up marrying a man who was light skinned also, who, and they had children and they were all light skinned. So she's this central character in a way, and her attitude of her being very, very much not wanting anything to do with Black people and run away from that and wanting to live as if she was white. Then she ended up having 3 children. So Christopher, her son, who again was a young man who could pass for white, Teresa, her daughter, who could pass for white, and then she had Oliver, who came out bronze. They talked about how beautiful he was, but he couldn't pass for white, and she rejected him.
Yeah.
It was really, that was hard.
Tragic. Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
hard. And so all of this is set up like in the plot portion of the book, and in the characters, those 2 portions. So you kind of see, okay, here are all the people, here are the dynamics. And then you learn about each of the three of the key people, 2 of her children, and then one other young lady who, Phoebe, was a friend of the children who could pass for white. So you hear about Teresa's life and directly, and you hear about Oliver's life and then Phoebe's life. And
Mhm.
in all of these things, her attitude and her desire to protect her children and have them live a life where, or her family, where live a life where they could live like they're white, affected everything. And she had a lot of control. So giving everyone that synopsis in this story, how did you feel about Olivia? How did she make you feel?
Oh man, there were complicated feelings for sure. On one hand, I definitely understood why she wanted to try to pass and
Mhm.
live as a white person, wanted her children to be able to live as white people, because at the end of the day, you want your children to have a better life than you had. And, at that point in time in America, the only real way to to really get ahead in life, at least at the point that she dreamed of them being ahead in life, because being Black definitely had its limitations. You could do
Mhm.
well for yourself for a Black person, but you could essentially never do well as you would if you were a white person. So I understand why she would want that, wanting the best for yourself, wanting the best for your children, wanting to be able to just opt out of people being racist against you, and having the ability to do that,
Mhm.
is a privilege that most people didn't have at that time and still don't have. And so, looking at it from her eyes, harnessing that privilege and turning it into something good for herself and for her children, I totally get that. But on the other hand, how inflexible she is about it and how intolerant of other people in her family, their attitudes toward passing. For instance, when her children did not want to pass, didn't care to pass, wanted to be friends with, Teresa wanting to be friends with a little Black girl who could not pass.
Mhm.
She sort of pushed that on to her children and wouldn't even let them associate with other Black people. So essentially, like, she was behaving in all ways like a white person. She was
Mhm.
behaving like an oppressor. So, obviously don't agree with that, don't condone that, don't, I there's no reasonable explanation for that, aside from her wanting her children to do better. But, at the same time, you can't force people to do something that they don't want to do,
Yeah.
and respecting the agency of your children, I think, is more important than trying to force them into what you think is a better life for them,
Mhm.
because they would have been miserable. I mean, they were
Yeah. They
Teresa, ended up miserable because that's what, she was trying to do. And, she lost a relationship that, someone that she really loved because of her mother's sort of tyrannical idea of everybody who can pass should pass.
Mhm. Yeah, the mother, was not my favorite character.
No,
she
not in the
she
least.
was easy to dislike. She's very easy to
Yes,
dislike in this because she does some
very much so.
foul things all the way
Oh, yeah.
through, all the way up to the end.
Oh, yeah.
She's foul, but her
Yes.
life doesn't end well. Yeah,
No,
I will say that.
no.
So I'll leave that for you. So when you read it, especially when you read the curtain section, the final uh, portion of the
Yeah.
book, at the end of the day, her life didn't end well, and her choices she made for her children really didn't end well at all.
Yeah. No,
Um,
yeah, only a couple of them. They're like,
yeah,
oh, well, just one of her children.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that child's spouse, their lives, eventually righted themselves after she was out of the picture,
Mhm.
essentially. But, her interference was too much for two of the children, and, their lives obviously did not go
No,
very well.
not at all. Not at all. And then her rejection of Oliver, um,
Yeah.
was just sad. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
led to
honestly,
great
like, that
tragedy
was
for him.
yeah, and I mean, and that was pretty tough for me to read, um, because, again, I'm mixed, so, my mom's white.
Mhm.
My mom's family is racist.
Hmm.
There's no way to color that. It's it's definitely one of those things. Like, they never met my father. They did not want to meet my father. They didn't want anything to do with my father. And I didn't learn until I was about 10 years old why my father never came to visit. Because when we would go visit my dad's mom, we would all go over there. My mom was
Right.
welcome, and my dad's mom's home, and they didn't always get along. Like my grandmother, like, I'm not gonna lie, my dad's mom did not like white people.
Mhm.
Now, granted, she was born in 1917. She had plenty of reasons not to like
She
white
had a
people.
history there.
Let's keep it real. But she was not disrespectful to my mom.
Mhm.
She did not exclude her from the family just because she was white. She
Mhm.
wasn't happy that my dad married a white woman, but she rolled with the punches, so to
Mhm.
speak. My mom was never as close to my grandmother as she might have been had, my mother been Black.
Right.
Um, but, she wasn't excluded. But my dad was excluded by my mom's family. And then, when I kept asking about it, finally my mom came clean, I guess, when she felt like my sister and I were old enough to know
Okay.
the truth. And, she told us, the reason he doesn't go is because, my mom really doesn't approve of, black and white people marrying each other. And, she doesn't think it's right. And she really doesn't like the idea of me being married to a black man.
Mm-hmm.
And, my parents, I remember having a conversation when I was maybe probably 3, 4 years old, where I think I was sitting in my mom's lap and they were talking to me and saying, some people are not going to like you because your parents don't match, essentially was a
Mm-hmm.
conversation. And you don't need those type of people in your life. They are not, your true friends. They are not people that you need in your life. So don't be hurt when they don't accept you into their lives because you deserve better than that. It is their loss,
Mm-hmm.
not yours. And so that was instilled in me at a very early age. And so as I got older and realized that my grandmother was one of these people, it was kind of a no-brainer for me to be like, well, I don't want to see her anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if she's not going to accept my dad, then that means that she doesn't accept part of me. That, she probably begrudgingly lets us come. And, I always noticed that we got different gifts than my cousins did,
Mm.
during Christmas time and things. They would get nicer things. I mean, my grandmother, my mom's mom, wasn't wealthy by any means, so the gifts were always, like board games and, small things like that. But still
Right.
they would get slightly nicer things. And I noticed it, but I thought, oh, they're older. So maybe that's why they're getting nicer things because they're older. That was the way that I kind of
Mm-hmm.
explained it in my own head. And then, once my mom told me the real story, I was like, oh, that's what's going on here. It's not just my dad. Like, she also doesn't really see me and my sister as whole people. And once I realized that, I was like, I don't want to speak to her anymore. And my sister was like, oh, I don't want to speak to her either. And my sister wrote her a whole letter,
Mm.
basically saying, like, this is messed up and I don't want anything to do with you because when you reject my dad, you're also rejecting me. Which, my sister was, last time I talked to my sister about it, she said she was 9, but I think she might have been, 7 or 8 actually. For someone that young to be writing a letter
Yeah.
to someone who's supposed to be their grandparent and explaining to them that the way you're trying to treat me is not okay. Like, I really felt for Oliver. He didn't know what was going on until he was much older, but he still was the victim of a lot of the same things that I was a victim of. And like that was really like it was really interesting to read like someone else's perspective, kind of like looking outside into what I experienced as a
Mm-hmm.
child.
Oliver's story was the hardest to read.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, most definitely.
Teresa's story. So in Teresa's story, she falls in love. She's close to marrying the gentleman she wants, and he's bronze. He's not like chocolate black, but he's bronze.
Right.
And
Yeah.
they talk
He
about
ain't
how he's
passing.
handsome. He's not passing. He can't pass.
Right.
Uh, and then when they're ready to elope and go off, and then she's confronted by her mom. Her mom called her by her full name. So she's in trouble. When parents call you by your full
Right.
name in public,
Right.
I need to
It's about to go
identify you.
down. Right.
And she caves. Up until then, she was like, I don't be free of this. I'm tired of her. I don't believe what
Right.
she believes. No,
Yeah, she
no,
was
no, no, no.
determined.
But she couldn't stand up to her mother,
Yeah,
which,
not to her face, not to
no.
her face. She very strong-willed in her head, but when it
Mm-hmm.
really came time to do it, she could not look her mother in the face and do it.
And as much as she said she didn't like what her mother was doing, she did it when she went to school. She's kind of like, well, everybody assumed
Right.
I was white, so I just pretend to be white.
Might as well. Right. Like, yeah, I mean, at this point, I don't have a choice. I felt like she kinda like, after that, she got to the point that she realized that she was not going to be happy. Her mother was not going to let her be happy
Mhm,
unless she lived a life where she could pass, which meant marrying a man who was either white or passed for white, depending on how deceitful she wanted to be.
mhm,
And that's ultimately the route that she chose was to cave in to her mother because I feel like she felt that she couldn't find happiness any other way.
Yeah. And it didn't work out for her. She ended up in a very unhappy
No.
marriage. Very
Yeah.
unhappy marriage, which was
Yeah.
another tragedy. But I in her life, and so we talked about Teresa, that's one act. Then there's Oliver, that's I guess the
Mhm.
second act, and his life. And when he suddenly had that realization, like you said, you have, when someone is rejecting you because of your skin color, uh, and
Someone you're related to, someone
someone,
who's your blood that should
yes,
love you and dote on you.
and how tragic that happened. And then when he realized that Teresa couldn't help him, as he always saw her as his lifeline. She'll never let me down.
Yeah.
And
Right.
yet she couldn't because of her life circumstances. And
Yeah.
it led to tragedy for him. So you see how the mother's effect had that. And then the other act, just so everybody knows, is um, Phoebe. I hope I'm pronouncing her name
Mhm.
right. Phoebe, who,
Yeah, that's how I read it,
yeah,
so.
who was a very, very light skinned black woman,
Yeah,
but she
blonde
blonde. She,
even. Yeah.
just blonde with curls. And they talk about her hair. And but she chose that no, I do not want to pass. So you had the
Mhm.
wide spectrum. You had someone who ended up, well, the mother who definitely wanted to, and then the daughter who ended up doing it, the son who was a
Mhm.
victim of the resentment because he couldn't
Mhm.
pass. And then Phoebe, who was like, no, I don't want to. And the choices she made.
Mhm.
Um,
Which is
and
very similar to Christopher. You
yeah,
know, he could have passed and he chose not to,
yeah,
and he refused to bow down to what his mother wanted,
yeah.
even when it became hard.
And so you see all of that in this story, and it will leave you drained after you read it.
Yeah.
It will pull up things, but it to take it beyond color and that, which is so very obvious. Okay, to take it beyond that, like you mentioned, where there are children who have to pass as straight when they're not,
Mhm.
you know, or people who you mentioned someone who may not believe in a particular religious faith, but you know what? If I want to maintain a relationship with my family, I better not say what I really believe.
Right. That was me for a long time.
And that in the whole story, I felt this tension of, you're walking, it's like you're walking on the edge of a cliff and the rocks are breaking out from under you all the time. And how did how do you think these characters felt with that? Even with the decision of passing, to me, it seemed it would be easier not to pass because then it's just, well, it's out there. But how do you
Right.
think these characters felt with their decision to pass?
You know, I think that, Teresa in particular only chose to pass because her mother basically enforced it. So obviously it left her very, very unhappy. Um, Phoebe could have passed, but she chose not to. Christopher could have passed, but he chose not to. And I think that the thing that sets those who chose to pass versus those who chose not to, the thing that sets them apart is I think, there are some people who are fine living a lie,
Hmm.
whether that's just lying to the people around them or, exaggerating about the things that they have. And then there are people that are like, I don't have the energy to be trying to uphold a whole nother fictional
Right.
world. I got enough stuff going on. I don't need to try to hold up this whole, universe that I've created. And I think that, really that decision comes down to whether or not someone will be too stressed out to continue living a lie. It's, kinda like
Hmm.
people who commit crimes and, they're always looking over their shoulder
Yeah.
because they're worried, am I gonna get caught? Am I gonna get caught? And a lot of people just don't commit crimes like that because they know that they're not gonna be able to live the rest of their life constantly looking over their shoulder, worrying, what is this next new forensic thing that's gonna come out and catch me and throw me in jail, kinda like the Golden State Killer who got away with it for, decades.
Yeah.
And, they found him, I bet he thought that he had gotten away with it at that point. Um, so I see it as very similar to that kind of mentality. Am I willing to live a lie? Am I willing to put in the energy to keep that lie going? Because it's not like you can just do it one time and you're done and you don't have to do anything else. You can wipe your hands of it. If you want to pass for the rest of your life, you've got to make conscious choices every single day. Every
Mhm.
single thing you do is going to be dictated by whether or not it's going to expose you. And that's just that's something that a lot of people just aren't capable and aren't willing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if you actually you get started on it and then you realize, oh my God, this is a lot more than just I'm
Right.
not just going to be able to say it once. I have to and who you have to cut out your
Right.
life and questions, I just can't take you to see my parents. I'm sorry.
Right.
That
Yeah. You've gotta yeah, it's like people have a whole 'nother family,
yeah.
they've got, they're married to 2 people are trying to hide it, like that. That's too much stress. First of all, like, why would you want 2 spouses? That seems like a lot of stress
Mm, that
to maintain. 2 spouses, 2
yeah.
families, like, that's a lot.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
And see,
One is a
this is
lot,
why
but
I'm not one
2,
of those people that
mm-mm.
chose to pass, even though I could, not pass as white, I could pass as something else, but, like, I chose not to because. Damn, that's a lot of work. Like,
Yeah.
I don't wanna do all that work. I don't wanna lie. I don't want to feel like I'm not being true to myself. And, also, I know that, my father, my dad's mother, that whole side of the family, they would, I don't wanna say look down on me for it, but I would not be making them proud to
Mhm.
pretend to be something that I wasn't.
Yeah.
And I feel like I owe my family more than that.
Yeah. You wouldn't wanna hurt your family in that
No.
way, and,
No, because I mean, it's essentially saying that I reject what you are.
right.
If I choose to be, even though I'm that too, I just look a little bit different and I can choose to be something else if I'm willing to do whatever it takes to support that lie. I don't want to be like you. And that's a really hurtful thing.
Mhm.
Even though you're not saying with words, you're saying with actions, which honestly is probably worse. The things you say with actions are worse than the things you say with words a lot of time.
Yeah.
And, rejecting your entire family for that just because you can do something different. Just I don't know. I'm not about that life.
Right. And I guess the same thing could happen with class where people pretend to be from a different, if, um, you get to go to a prestigious Ivy League school and then you pretend like you don't come from, like me, I'm from Cleveland. You don't come from the east side of Cleveland. You know,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
you come from somewhere else, or you didn't just go to public high school, blah, blah, blah. You went
right,
somewhere else because you're around people who have more. But eventually it
right,
catches up with you, or you have to spend a
yeah,
lot of time hiding it, and that is just
yeah,
too tiring. That would
yeah,
suck the life out you real quick.
yeah. I feel like it would send you to an early grave. I mean,
Yeah.
that level of stress, like, I would be really interested to see, like, if there's any studies on people who lead double lives, however they define that. What is the average age of death for people that live double lives versus people who don't live double lives? I would imagine that's gotta wreak havoc on your
It has
body.
to. Unless you got a little sociopath in you, then it probably doesn't matter.
Then
It's like,
maybe you'd be
"What?
alright. If you're a
What?
psychopath, you can do
Yeah, what?
it.
That's not a problem?
Maybe
What?"
that's what it is. Maybe Olivia was a psychopath,
Yeah,
you know?
after looking at some of her actions,
Yeah. I would definitely put that in the very possible bucket.
yeah, if there's a spectrum of being on a psychopath, she's on it. I'm not saying
She's
she's
definitely
full-fledged
on
killing
it.
people, but she's
Right.
on
She's
it.
definitely yeah, and very controlling,
Yeah,
very controlling. It's not just, her decision to pass. She mandated that to everyone else around her. Like even her husband who didn't want to pass
yeah.
had to some degree to keep her happy until he decided not to anymore.
So, beyond the theme of passing and its effects and color bias and its effects, one other thing I picked from all of Fawcett's books are women's lives during that time and how dependent they
Mhm.
were on the men they married.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
when you read that, other women, how did you feel? Did this at any point that you like, and want to come through the book and kill one of these guys? Or how did it make you feel?
Honestly, like, I'd always kind of known that it was that way. So, it didn't really bother me, I guess, because I just, I knew that that's how it was. Now, if things were still that way, and I mean, they are a little bit, to some degree. Women aren't completely dependent on men, but there's still a lot of income inequality between men and women, job opportunities, things like that. And, like, yes, it was frustrating. Don't get me wrong. Like, it was definitely frustrating to be put into the shoes of these women who, when they're going to school, they're thinking about marriage prospects and who they're going to marry. They couldn't be just a person. They had to be somebody's wife. And to get to be somebody's wife, they had to be somebody's girlfriend, so like that, their stories, everything told from their point of view was centered around who they were going to marry, whereas everything from the men's point of view was just how they were going about their lives. So it really drove home that this lack of agency that women had at the time dictated how they lived their lives. They basically could not dream of anything for themselves specifically. And I say they couldn't, but one of the characters definitely did carve out a life for herself, something she wanted to do, made her own money. But that was also incredibly unusual at the time. I do genealogy for fun. And one thing that I've noticed, in doing family trees, like my great grandmother was married like 3 or 4 times, I can't remember.
Okay.
But I mean, it was like you can look at the census records and the marriage records and you can see like she wasn't very long. Like she divorced one and, she moved on to the next. And I know that it wasn't because she, necessarily wanted to. I know that it's because she had to. Because otherwise, those marriages wouldn't have ended it so quickly. She definitely didn't suffer fools. She did not stay in a miserable marriage like a lot of women did at that time because they felt like they had no choice but to stay in that marriage. My great grandmother was, I never met her, but just looking at those records, she was obviously the type of person that if she wasn't happy with you, she was going to go find somebody else, to kind of fill that spot. And I can't help but feel that had she had her own agency and been able to, do things like, make enough money to support herself or, borrow money if she needed it, buy a home, any of that kind of thing. Like, I have no doubt that she would have probably stayed single, for a long time after her first marriage, at least. Because she did end her life single, it got to the point where once her children got grown and they could help, provide for her because she had sons, that as soon as that happened, she divorced her last husband and she stayed single until she died.
When I suddenly didn't need you for
Right.
protection
Yeah,
and
like
support.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, it's sad for both parties, at that point. It's sad for the woman because she doesn't have any agency of her own and can't make her own choices and is beholden to someone else who can treat her any way that he wants to treat her because he knows that she needs him. But then, it's also not fair to the men because women are, attaching themselves to men not out of love, but out of necessity.
Yeah. So now you're a paycheck and you're. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was frustrating for me as someone who likes to advocate for women and just, I have nieces and a godchild who I really don't want them to be in a position like this. And just seeing how. Well, what frustrated me was the 2 gentlemen, Christopher and Nicholas, when they finally got their census and got with the woman they said they loved. They both were broken and needed help. They didn't.
Yeah.
Consider I'm supposed to be with you and my life's supposed to get better. And the 2 women they got with, Phoebe and Maurice. Maurice went on to become a major entertainer and she had her following. And Phoebe went on to become a well-respected dressmaker, and she was well on the way to owning her own shop. And they ended up, both these 2 gentlemen professed their love to them, but they had to do a whole lot of caretaking of these guys. And it's like, God,
But yeah, even when they did have a choice because they had their own money, they still ended
And it
up
had
having
been
to
like,
fulfill like what the man at that time would have normally the role that the man would have
yeah,
fulfilled in the relationships. And not only did they not have real agency, to be able to go out and just do things without, their husband's signature on something, but they also were the breadwinners,
yeah.
you know?
A-
So that's gotta be stressful and tough, you
And
know?
she slips that in there. She tells it, but I also realized, she had to get it published in the 20s.
Yeah.
So you can only be so woman power in the
Graphic.
20s.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
she
definitely.
slips in that message that no, black women been holding it down, and now I got to take care of you. At one
Right.
point I got to take care of you, your dad, your mom, my mom.
Yeah.
Ah,
And your crazy
mom,
mom,
I got to do
not
all
just
that,
any mom.
and
Yeah, and I mean, it almost ended the marriage, I
yeah,
feel like, so I think tragedy was averted
yes,
there,
yes,
but, I think it was almost accidental that
yes.
tragedy was averted there.
Phoebe came out the best, and she wasn't,
Yeah.
but she wasn't directly related to um the mother. So
Right.
she,
So she could make her own choices to some degree.
yeah, and she had a good supportive mother and
Yeah.
family, and Phoebe is the one who's so light with blonde hair she could pass, but she decided no,
Yeah.
and
And there
even
was even that rich white dude that,
yeah,
was like, "I wanna marry you," and then she was like, "Dude, I'm black."
no,
And he was like, "Ew."
oh yeah, you should be whipped.
And
you should have be whipped. She's
right.
like, and
Yeah,
then
and
he's
then,
talking
like,
about
a
no,
few
I
months
really love
later
you, but he said, well, wait a minute,
right,
5 minutes ago you said I should be whipped.
right, sending her, what was it? Like, he sent her, like, a check to buy a
Oh
nice
yeah,
dress. I can't he sent her a bunch of stuff, like, maybe,
yeah,
like, 5 grand worth of stuff, which is a
here,
lot of money at that time, being like, "We can't get married, but I love you very much." And she
yes,
was like, If you don't wanna marry me, then you don't really
no,
love me, so F you."
no,
Which
I'm
I
not
was
going to
like
be
I
the
was so happy to
concubine.
see that, because like, with the way everything else was going, I thought she was gonna cave in
Hmm.
and end up marrying this dude. So I was so
Yeah.
glad to see when she did not do that.
So for at least one of the children, of Olivia, Christopher, he came out all right, and
Mhm.
and it is kind of like, and I know I was talking about the previous book, and one of their books, and the person I was talking with said how the story kind of contains several things. It contains a love story and a tragedy and several things in it. And this one, there
Mhm.
is a little bit of a love story. It's buried, but it's a little bit of a happily ever after. But there's a lot of
Yeah.
tragedy. If you're looking for a
Oh,
happily
yeah.
ever after, this isn't the
This
book.
ain't it.
No, you might not want to read this one. You might
Not it.
might want to
Yeah.
read some of the earlier ones. But yeah, I think Fawcett at the time, in the way she probably could in the 1920s in terms of getting book published, also gave an insight into the plight of women at that time, and also a new breed of woman coming about. This I always talk about how with her books at that time period they were kind of like the first generation not directly affected by slavery. So they kind of live this life
Yeah.
in Philadelphia. She paints a picture of Black Philadelphia that's not just downtrodden horrible, but there was a middle class and people
Yeah.
became
Wealthy
doctors and
Black people and
yeah.
yeah.
And we're going to Harvard and it was just like,
Yeah.
that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, doing basically the best Black people could do
Yes.
at the time. Those were the people that were illustrated in this book, and I really enjoyed seeing that because I
Hmm.
think, honestly, this is the first time I think I've read any story where most of the Black characters were well-to-do
Yeah.
from that era.
And her other books are like this too. So you'll see middle class and upper class Black people being portrayed. It's not so much, oh my gosh, we're
Yeah,
still
and I
getting
wonder if
hit.
that's one reason that her work hasn't stood the test of time like some of the other authors. I think that with the way racism is set up here in America, that the story of Black people being poor and unable to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and all that nonsense. I think that probably affected how much reach her work got, not necessarily in the Black community, but in the community as a whole.
Hmm.
I don't think most white people would want to read about well-to-do Black people.
Yeah.
I think that, reading about black pain, I mean, it's still the same way today. You're watching movies and you look at half of the movies out there that aren't made by Black people, but the main characters are Black people. It's all about their struggles, and they're poor, and, they're drug dealers, or they're this or they're
Yeah.
that, gangsters. Whereas, you can can't throw a rock
Right.
without hitting a show about white people who are wealthy and well-to-do.
Yeah.
You just don't see wealthy Black people on TV very often. I think Fresh Prince was probably the first show that had wealthy Black people that I
Yeah.
can ever remember. Like, I think it might be the only one that I can remember, if I'm honest.
There wasn't that constant fear of crime. That's what
Yeah.
I noticed. There was one point where they were walking somewhere, and I found myself, oh man, hope they're watching out. Because
Right.
if
And then,
how we
nothing
are.
happens. You're like, hold up, wait.
We think, yeah, and it's like,
Right.
no, they were just walking and
Yeah.
enjoying their life,
Living their
but now there
normal
was all
life.
sorts of drama going on,
Yes.
but it
But they weren't
wasn't.
dealing.
I didn't
Yeah, they
have to
weren't.
run away from the crack dealer. I didn't have to run away from Slim
Yeah.
Slim Jenkins coming after me for some money. I didn't have someone
Right.
begging me for money. I could just walk with my girl down the street.
Right. And even still, there wasn't a whole lot of racism from white people in the book.
Right.
Like there were definite, sprinkles here and there of white people mistreating Black people. But for the most part, all of the dealings with racism stemmed from Olivia's desire for everybody around her to pass,
It was
which I
much
found
more
really
internal.
interesting as well. Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely a story about Black people, and not about the way white people treat Black people,
Right.
or the way white people perceive
Yeah.
Black people. This was definitely, I feel like this was definitely written, obviously from a Black perspective, but for a Black audience
Mm-hmm.
as well, with no care as to how white people might receive it.
Right.
Whereas I feel like a lot of other Black literature at that time, yes, it was written for Black people, but you can definitely see in the way that the plots unfold and things like that, that it was written not necessarily for the white gaze, but accounting for the white gaze, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Which at the time was the major funders.
Yeah. Yeah, so you had to,
So
if you wanted to make money as a writer, you had to write in a
right.
way that was acceptable to white people.
Right.
And white people wanted stories about Black pain. They wanted to see white people inflicting pain on other Black people in these stories. And Jessie was like, nope. I'm
Got
going
a
to
whole
talk
different
about
story.
Black people that are doing well for themselves despite everything that's going on around them. And the story isn't even going to be centered around the racism that they experience at the hands of white people. It's about the racism that they experience at the hands of a Black woman.
Right.
Which, like, gave me some complicated feelings, don't get me wrong, because it's like, yes, there's racism in the Black community. Obviously, there's people just like Olivia
Yeah.
still today, that, wanna behave in that sort of way and, look down their nose at anyone who's darker skinned and, all of that, so it was definitely complicated to kinda see that gaze turned on Black racism, for lack of a better word, um, versus white racism.
Yeah. But I enjoy the story. I mean, well, as much as you can enjoy this much pain, but it's
Right. It
not
was an
just Black
entertaining
pain. It's not
story.
just Black trauma pain. It's more of trauma of family. And you have this one central
Yes.
character, this matriarch who is flawed in a
And
way
causing all the
and
problems.
and if she was that way, you could not, it couldn't just take a bunch of change the grouping, but if it was about class, you could still have that sort of thing where she could have a certain thing toward class. It was just that race is something where you truly don't have any choice about it. You
Yeah.
can earn your way out of a certain class, but you really can't do anything about the color of your skin. It is what it is. You didn't do
Mhm.
anything to get it. So, having read this book, how do you think it holds up to now if you're introducing this to people now?
I think it holds up surprisingly well. I think the same themes that are present in this book are still present today. Like I talked about, there's still people who want to pass, there's still people who do pass. There's definitely still some, I don't want to say reliance on men, um, women's reliance on men specifically, but there is still very much some reliance on having a male partner if you want to feel safe and
Mm-hmm.
secure. And I say that from the perspective of, being recently divorced. And, I was married at 21 years old. So, my entire adult life I was married. Um, and I didn't even like it didn't even occur to me really because I always had roommates in college and then I moved in with my ex husband who was my boyfriend at the time. So I never really lived alone. And, after my divorce, I lived alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize how unsafe that would make me feel, like being the only person in the house, um, and, having to depend on myself for my safety.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's not like I needed a man in my life, but it became really apparent to me the advantages I had of having a man in my life. So, that obviously still exists today. Having two incomes is a huge deal.
Yeah.
Anybody on either side of the coin, man or woman, who's single and only has a single income, it's very difficult to make ends meet, especially if you're a single parent.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you live like in an incredibly rural area that happens to have really good job prospects. Which I don't know any place like that. And if you do know a place like that, please let me know.
Yeah, I'll let you know. I'm not going. I'll just tell you because we're not going to let everybody know about it.
Right, we're gonna keep it to ourselves, right? Because then if everybody moves there, it's just gonna be expensive, and
back.
what's the
Yeah.
point?
Next thing you know, it's
But
San
yeah,
Francisco.
right, exactly. But yeah, but the point is yes, I think that this is still very much the themes in this book are still very much alive today. I think the severity of um, some of the things that happen to these characters is definitely less than it was. Racism definitely isn't the same way that it was in the 20s and 30s, but it's still very much alive today, and we're still struggling with a lot of the same things that the characters in this book struggled with. So I do think that it's incredibly relevant today, and I think more than that, it is an insight into the way certain people think and the way certain people live that I have not encountered in any other piece of literature.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is incredibly important. And I'm actually really sad that this book isn't in school libraries. I get that it's an older book and it's a little bit more of a difficult read because the writing style was different then than it is now. Um, but I do think that the themes are very important, and I think that people, especially people who cannot pass, and people who are white or of another race other than black, could benefit from reading this book and
Right.
hearing this point of view of this struggle of I could have a better life if I just lied about everything,
Mm-hmm.
and what that does to a person.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And you know, they force us. One of the books you got to read Chaucer. And that's definitely not the way people talk. People are you're going to read Shakespeare. That's not the way people talk.
Yeah, we still had to read that in school. I
You
mean, my
still got to
teacher
read
read
it.
us Chaucer in Middle English. Like she had an English degree and she learned Middle English as
Mm,
part of her, and it was beautiful to hear her read it. Didn't understand a word,
yeah.
so we read it, in more modern English, the translation in more modern English. But yeah, I mean, yeah, the language is no excuse not to have this in a school library or to have it as a discussion in English classroom. Especially like at the high school
Definitely.
level. I don't think this is accessible for like middle
No,
schoolers, but
it's a little harsh
you
for
know,
that.
especially like AP English. I think this would be a great book for
Yeah.
AP English, particularly if you're in a school that is predominantly white, doesn't have very many minorities, and if you're in a school that's predominantly black, to help those black kids see that perspective, see what those characters are struggling with, because I'm sure some of them can pass for white or pass for something other than
Mm-hmm.
black. And reading about that perspective, I think could could maybe make them feel more proud about being black.
And also make you understanding of things people are going through. Like, maybe you'll be a little more reluctant to just snap off and say stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
like, what,
Exactly.
maybe I'll
Yeah.
just hold that comment, you
Yeah.
know?
And I think that's what's great about books is they breed empathy in us. And when we read about other perspectives that aren't our own, we become more empathetic to people who we necessarily haven't had a lot of experience with in our lives. Like I don't have a whole lot of personal experience with transgender people, but I've read, a few books with transgender main characters in the last couple of years, and it really opened my eyes to some of the struggles that they had. I knew that they had struggles. It's not that,
Mm-hmm.
I was denying, oh, they have a, great life. Like obviously I didn't think that, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't necessarily know what kind of struggles they dealt with, aside from people just being bigots to them. Like what specific flavor of bigotry were they dealing with? Um, and I definitely wasn't like transphobic before, but I feel like I'm more able to empathize with them now and not use words or language that might be harmful
Mm-hmm.
to them. Not that I would have, called them a slur or anything before, but there's some things that you just say unintentionally.
Right.
Like I remember like when I was in high school in the 90s, like there was this big thing, like if, something was, kind of dumb, you'd be like, "Oh, that's gay."
Yeah.
And like I remember saying that, and my gay friend was right next to me and he was like, "That's not cool." And I was like, What's wrong with that?" And
Yeah.
he explained it to me and I was like, "Oh." So it's like stuff like that where you don't even think that, oh, this could be something that, is really hurtful
Mm-hmm.
to someone because you're not part of that experience. I think literature, TV, film is the best way to build empathy and sort of stomp out bigotry.
And I love literature even more because literature, because of the cost of producing a book, is so much less than the cost of producing a movie.
Mhm.
It means a lot to produce a movie.
Yeah.
And TV
Orders of
shows takes
magnitude.
a lot of money, even
Yeah.
everything. And so you always have to go for the broadest audience possible because you got to make money. Whereas literature, you can find that niche audience. It may, you know, everything isn't going to sell umpteen million copies. Everyone isn't Michelle Obama. They could just sell a book because she puts her name on it.
Right, exactly.
But with literature, you are able to tell these stories. And like you said, it's so important. And it's great that we live in a time where all of these books are so easily available.
Yeah.
I'll be 61 in April. So, I I remember when I was 20 or so, you go around and you found there were a couple of black owned bookstores. And, that was like, oh my gosh, that was like opening the golden chest and, oh,
Right.
I got to get them all. I got to
The
grab
heavenly
all these
light
books
shines down.
because you
Yeah.
didn't see them. You go in the store and they had the black section. Okay, we got a James Baldwin, a Richard Wright,
Yeah.
Toni Morrison. Okay, we put her there too. Okay. And that
Right.
was kind of it.
Maya Angelou,
Yeah,
yeah.
Maya Angelou. Oh yeah, you gotta get. I know why the cage bird
Got it.
sings. Yeah, you had that, and then
Yeah.
but you didn't know. But now we live in a time where you can find out about this literature, and you can go back and
Yeah.
read these stories, and it just it's amazing, and you want to. I feel as us as Black people, we need to champion our own stories amongst ourselves, and we need to
Yes.
support them. You can't ask other people to do something if you're not doing it, and we have the ability now to share and make our
Yes.
own mini renaissance of the
Yes.
literature. Because
Yeah.
there's a lot coming out, but you also will find out that, okay, I know there was a lot of attention to the Vanishing Half that came out where dealt with passing, but this theme is actually kind of old and might want to read some of
Yeah.
the originators. And
Yeah.
in a different
Exactly. And see
time.
how it's changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, it
Yeah.
gives you a better perspective on things when you start feeling like things are like, oh my gosh. Like, okay, all right, Curtis, calm down.
Right.
you know, and it maybe it's just the advantage of, I'm getting older. So I've seen a couple of cycles of things and you're like, okay,
Yeah.
I've seen this before. It isn't the worst time. Trust me, this isn't the worst time.
Right.
And
Yeah.
things are getting better in a lot of ways. I think of the world as just changing. The number of interracial couples has gone up. The number of young children who aren't going to so easily be able to say, I don't like you because of this or that, because suddenly that means I'm rejecting this part of my family or that part of my family is
Right.
going up. And I think that's just going to make us better as people.
Yeah.
When everybody talks about Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, and he talks one day, black children, white children, all sorts of children holding hands. And we say that, but I think a lot of people think, no, what it really means for some black people, I think they feel that, no, what we're going to have is equity, equality, but we're still going to be our own little group. And that's just not the way things work at some point.
Yeah.
And you do end up having people come together, and you're going to have people fall in love, because ultimately people are people. And
Right.
the sooner we can drop some of these things from the past, or fight past them, the better we'll be. And just by reading this literature, it helps us gain some insight and make us a little more thoughtful. So
exactly.
What things, if someone were to ask you, okay, I heard you talking about that, what was the 2 or 3 things you really, really liked about it that made you keep reading the book?
Oh, I would say for me, probably the biggest thing was seeing if her children would choose to pass, or if they would be rebellious and stick to what they wanted to do. And I know that that's, a very superficial thing, but that's what really kept me reading, I guess I should say. The thing that intrigued me about this when you first reached out to me, and, like I said earlier, when, I saw the title, I was like, what? And then, when I read about it, I was like, oh, the thing that intrigued me was, this idea of passing, and not just because I'm a person that could pass for another race, but also because race has been such a huge factor in my life, growing up. And just seeing that explored on the page is not something that I've had the opportunity to do that often.
I would definitely recommend everyone, pick up Comedy America Style, Jessie Redmon Fauset, and on any of the 4 books. And you can find my previous discussions about the books. Just go to ifoundthisgreatbook.com/Jessie, JESSIE. And there I have all my previous discussions about the other 3 books. And then also that's where you'll find this discussion if you want to listen to it. If you're saying, oh man, I just want to bookmark that, I want to share it, because there's some people who need to know about this author. You can just share the page. And for us to remember, there, it's not just Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, and James Baldwin and Richard Wright. There are other Black people who wrote books, okay, in the past. And we need to share and talk about these. And it's just been a pleasure. It's really been an honor talking with you, Tonia. It's really been great. And but you brought some real valuable insight and depth to this conversation. And hopefully we've intrigued some people to pick up the book. It's a pretty good read. It's a fairly quick read. It's not going to bog you down. It's not although she does have a vocabulary now. You will improve your vocabulary by reading this book.
Yeah, there were a couple words I was like, hold up, let me look that up.
And there is a poetry to her writing at points, but it's beautiful. It's not just done for the sake of doing it. It's done in the right place. So definitely you want to read these books. Also, you want to check out Tonia Ransom on the Nightlight Podcast. So that's nightlightpod.com. Hey, one quick question. Why did you call it Nightlight?
I honestly don't remember. I remember thinking I want to shed a light on Black horror. And I remember thinking okay, well, people use night lights if they're afraid. So that kind of goes with the horror thing. And then, I'm also shedding the light on it. And honestly, it was just it took me 2 minutes to come up with the name. It just popped into my head and it seemed appropriate. And that's kind of what I went with. I wish I had a really nice story about it, but I don't.
That's okay. That's all right. I like it. Nightlightpod.com. Nightlightpod.com. You want to go there And then from there, you can subscribe to the podcast and get all the great episodes. Also, you know what? I'll let you in on a little secret. So you can become a patron of Nightlight Podcast. And then you get some episodes early and you get some special stuff. So I like it because I get mine before other people. So I can get scared out of my wits before other people. And then Tonia's always dropping something extra in there. So I would encourage you to do that. And also just to support the great work that Tonia is doing. She is bringing horror by Black authors to the front, and she has made it possible for people to get published and paid for their work. A lot of them, it was the first time they got published and paid for their work. So Tonia is doing it up over there. Anything special coming up on Nightlight that we should look for?
Yeah, the next season of Nightlight is starting in February, so just in a couple of weeks. I guess probably a week after this actually goes live. We'll be doing our season 5 premiere, and thanks to our generous patrons, we're now going to be able to do year-round episodes. So we'll no longer be taking a hiatus between the end of October and the beginning of February. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, and it's great. You have an immense back catalog now because you've been doing it for a while. So you can try to catch up and get ready for the next episodes. And you might need your nightlight too on some of the stories. A couple of them started messing with me. I said, let me turn the light on. You got me worried about stuff. Like, oh man, I never thought about that. Let me. And you have all sorts of types of horror, and it helps you expand and gain insight into that genre. A lot of times people are like, oh, I don't want to do that, but just give it a try. Just listen to one story. You'll be okay. Yeah. You'll be all right. You can always turn the light on.
Right. And you can always turn it off if it becomes too much.
Yeah, you can always say, okay, I need to stop, take a break.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tonia, thank you so much. This has been so wonderful. I a big champion of your work, and I really, really thank you for joining me on this conversation.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
And everyone, stay safe and have a great reading day.